We thank God for yet another wonderful opportunity to come into His presence to learn. This video continues from where we left off the first video, where we did a Genesis chapter 1 to chapter 11. We continue with Genesis chapter 12 to chapter 15. And then we are looking at basically the forefathers of the Israel's kingdom. So shall we share a word of prayer? God, we thank you. We ask that you be with us in our studies today to grant us understanding in Jesus' name. Amen. So we are looking at the forefathers of Israel, from Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, to Joseph, where we have the whole setup. So our lesson today focus on the forefathers of Israel. And that will take us from Genesis chapter 12 up to the chapter 50. Okay, so off we go. So as I said, we are looking at the Israelites, the patriarchs of Israel, the forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. And that's our focus for this video. So a simple genealogy from Noah. We get to know that Noah, after the flood, God decided to have a recreation, as we talked about at that time. Noah, his son, first son, Shem. It moves from that lineage straight from the genealogy. We see it moving down and down and down to Nahor, to Terah, who gave birth to Abraham. And then we have the Haran, the Nahor, who was also a child of Terah. And it is through Abraham got Keturah after Sarah. Keturah came in, Hagar was also there with Abraham. And all these people made up Abraham, the wives of Abraham. Keturah, Abraham had 5 children, 6 children with Keturah, 6 children with Keturah, and then had 1 child with Ishmael. He also had 1 child with Sarah. But usually the Jewish look at Abraham and look at Isaac concept as the promised seed, same as the Islam. Islam look at Abraham, but they look at Ishmael as the promised seed. And Christianity looks at Abraham and look at Isaac as the promised seed. So our concern now is Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, lineage, which has Jacob in there. Esau was also a grandchild, but we are interested in the seed, the covenant. So we have the children of Jacob, Reuben, coming in as the first child, Simeon, Levi, Judah, from Leah, who was the first wife of Jacob. And then Zippah gave birth to Gad, and Ashabah. It was after Bilhah has given birth to Dan and Naphtali, before Ziblah, who was the servant of Leah, gave birth. So Rahel came in later with Joseph and Benjamin, the 2 children. But before then, Leah continued with Issachar, Zebulun, and then Dana. So these are the children of Jacob. Let's take Abraham. We get to know Abraham as the father, or God is exalted, as the meaning God, the father or God is exalted. And we get to know that the name earlier was Abram. Later it was changed to Abraham, which means the father of many nations. He was a native of Ur in Mesopotamia, and is called by God, Yahweh, to leave his own country and people and journey to a land which was unknown to him. Now, where you become the founder of a new nation and the father of that nation. He obeys the call. And then at age 75, he left his hometown, or together with the wife, Sarai, who was later named Sarah, meaning princess. Now, Sarah was without a child, but they were not the only people who left. Abraham also took his nephew Lot with him, and then he had other companions who of the land who were also with him. So they left the land to Canaan. Now, Abraham was without a child, but there was one thing that kept on coming. Repeatedly, God promised, came to him that he was going to have a child, and that child is a covenant child, a covenant seed from him, God. And that child, through him, he will become, his descendants will be so numerous, and then they will inherit the land that he's sending him to. Eventually, he had a son, and the name was Ishmael. When the wife gave his maidservant, Sarah gave his maidservant Hagar to him to have an affair with the maidservant, and then they born a child called Ishmael. But at age 100, Sarah also became pregnant and born a son called Isaac, who was the actual promised child, the one that God was looking out for. So Isaac was born. However, it's so amazing that when Isaac was born, God tested Abraham, commanded him to sacrifice Isaac. And then Abraham was ready to do it. He took Isaac, ready to slaughter him, only for God to stop it and give him a ram. As Sarah is dead, we realize that he purchased a cave and then near Hebron, and then make sure that that will be the burial place for the family. As we said, Keturah came in. There were 6 children in there for Sarah, for Keturah. So they had 6 children with Abraham, 6 children with Keturah. Now we continue from there. We get to know that towards the end of his life, we see him trying to get a wife for Isaac, not from where he was staying in Canaan, but they went back to his hometown to marry for Isaac, because the Lord God has told him that they are not supposed to mix up with the race in there. So he wanted to keep the commandment. So have to go back to his family, hometown, to get a wife for Isaac. Abraham died at age 175, and then he was buried next to Sarah. Let's look at some of the characteristics of Abraham. One, he was a righteous man with wholehearted commitment to God. He was a man of peace. We get to know that when they got to a point where the land was so vast, and then the herdsmen of him and that of Lot, his nephew, started having issues in taking care of the herds that they have, the flocks that they have, Abraham, being a peaceful man, decided to settle the dispute by giving boundaries. Lot was asked to choose wherever he wanted to be, even though he was the youngest, to make the first choice. And then after that, he also chose the other side. So he was a man of peace. Abraham was full of compassion. He was compassionate. How? He was the one who argued with the angel of God, or who bargained with God to spare the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. He started arguing, reducing the figure, reducing, continuously, making sure that he bargains to save some people. So he was a compassionate person. He was hospitable. He welcomed the 3 visitors who were going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, gave them water to wash their feet, gave them food to eat. He was somebody who receives visitors. He was a quick action warrior. When Lot's people came to loot all Lot's properties, he was ready to rescue Lot and his family from these people. He marched so much, he marched to fight for Lot and rescued him. After that, we get to know that he gave a tenth of whatever he had gathered to Melchizedek, the priest of Salem. So we get to know that he was a quick action warrior. He never take chances. He was ready to go. But one thing about him is also that he was a liar. He lied to save his own skin. Yes, at the point when he was with the wife Sarah, and then they go to Egypt because of the famine, they needed a place to stay and food to eat. He told the Pharaoh at the time that Sarah was the sister, even though from the genealogy, we get to know that, yes, Sarah was a sister one way or the other, because we get to know that if you look at it, Haran's daughter was Sarah. So we get to know that, yes, Sarah was a half sister, but a wife is a wife. Abraham decided to lie. Why? Because he wanted to save himself. He was afraid he would die. So if you look at these 6 qualities, characteristics of Abraham, all that we sum up to say that he appeared as a man of great spiritual depth and strength, and a person with common human weakness and needs. Just like any other person could fall, he has his own shortcoming. But notwithstanding it, he also had a spiritual lifestyle which was so perfect, committed to God, righteous, a peaceful person, compassionate, hospitable, ready to fight, ready to do anything to save humanity and for his people. So we can also look at it from that angle to say that, yes, he was also spiritually strong and then a man of strength. However, he was also of normal human weakness. Sarah, we just look at one thing. So we are looking at the patriarchs, and then Abraham, as I said, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. But we are looking, let's pick in Sarah, because Sarah is also managed to be one of the great people in this story. Sarah was called Sarai, was a wife of Abraham, the mother of Isaac, and she was childless until she was 90 years old, when the husband was 100 years, and then they gave birth to Isaac. God promised Abraham that she would be the mother of nations. So when we read Genesis chapter 17, verse 16, we get to know that God had promised that Sarah was going to be the mother of many nations. But you see, Sarah was without a child. So Genesis chapter 16, verse 17, we just pick that verse and we see how God had promised this couple to still have hope when at that age there was no hope. God still gave them hope. So Genesis chapter 16, verse 17, we read from here, that says, Genesis 17, verse 16, Genesis 17, verse 16, we read from here, I will bless her. And this is God talking to Abraham regarding, so let's speak from the 15. Then God said to Abraham, regarding Sarah, your wife, her name will no longer be Sarah. From now on, her name will be Sarah. And I will bless her and give you a son from her. Yes, I will bless her richly, and she will become the mother of many nations. Kings of nations will be among her descendants. So at that old age, the promise of God was still there for Sarah. And we get to know that she conceived and bare a child, even though she did not believe. In fact, it was quite some way for her to believe it, but it happened. God's promise was fulfilled. We get to know that The doubt was so strong, and it was out of her doubt that she convinced her husband to be with Hagar so that Hagar can bear children for her. We get to know that even when the angel of the Lord, the three visitors that come to Abraham, and they were still telling him that he will still give birth, Sarah kept laughing. She was just taking it to be, these people are not serious. How will I give birth? She kept on doubting. But we get to know that the promise of God came to pass. She was buried, as we said earlier, at Hebron, where Abraham purchased a land for her burial and for the family. Isaac was a product of Abraham and Sarah, and he is the second patriarch of the Israelites. Isaac was also the father of Esau and Jacob. Although Sarah was past the age of childbearing, we get to know that it came to pass as God had promised. Later, to test Abraham's obedience, we have made mention of it already. God commanded Abraham to sacrifice his boy, but instead a ram was provided by God. We get to know that Isaac got married to Rebekah after the father Abraham had made arrangement for him to marry from their hometown. Esau was the first child of Isaac and Rebekah. They were twins, so the eldest of the twin brothers. Jacob was the other twin brother. And it's believed that he is the ancestor of the Edomites. At birth, Esau was red and hairy. He became a hunter, whilst the brother was a shepherd. Now, we get to know that Jacob dominated most of the story between Esau and Jacob with so much deception. At one time, when Esau returned from unsuccessful hunt and was angry, Jacob bought Esau's birthright. His birthright by just giving him what? Red potato, which was soup, food. He just used food to buy his birthright. How did he do it? He told him that if you give him food to eat, then he should just forgo his birthright. And Esau, not thinking about anything, he was just thinking about his stomach, gave it out for food. When Isaac was about to die, Jacob, with the help of Rebekah, the wife of Isaac, cheated Esau by taking out his blessing to Jacob. So Jacob took the blessing of his senior brother because he deceived the father by putting the hair of the sheep on his skin, making himself hairy, and then preparing the food which his father was expecting to be prepared by Esau. After eating, the father, even though wasn't sure that it was Esau, blessed him because he had deceived him. We get to know that Esau could have killed Jacob, but Jacob fled because their mother advised him. And when he returned 20 years later, Esau just forgave him. He spent 20 years away, and when he came back, Esau just forgave him and decided to let him be. We come to the man Jacob that we have been mentioning all this while. Jacob was also called Israel, and he's a third patriarch. He was a grandson of Abraham and a son of Isaac and Rebekah. And traditionally, he's the ancestor of the people of Israel. We get to know from Genesis chapter 25, verse 19, that's where Jacob's story really begins. Jacob was the youngest of the twins. And then we get to know that they all had their own separate job to do. Whilst he was a shepherd, Esau was a hunter. During pregnancy, we are told that Rebekah was told by God that she would give birth to twins. Each of them will found a great nation. And Esau, the eldest, will serve the younger brother. So that means that the prophecy was given before But to let the prophecy be fulfilled, that means that Jacob decided to use deception all the way to get the prophecy coming true. I'm sure the good Lord knew how you go about it without the help of Jacob, but Jacob still had his own way of going about it. As it turned out, Jacob did everything he could, as I said, by deception to obtain the birthright as the elders from their father. We get to know that he has to now go run away because of what he did to the brother. Along his journey, Jacob received a special revelation from God. God promised Jacob lands and numerous offspring that will prove to be the blessing of the entire earth. And what happened? Jacob named that place where he has received that vision Bethel, meaning the house of God. He arrived at his uncle Laban's home, and then he fell in love with his own cousin called Rahel. He worked for Laban, who was his uncle, for 7 years to obtain Rahel's hand in marriage. But then his own uncle also tricked him. He substituted the elder sister, Leah, for Rahel after the wedding. Jacob was now compelled to work for another 7 years to get Rahel. And so he did. So 14 years, he has to work for the love of his heart. Jacob then served Laban for another 6 years. So that is where we start to do the calculation that when he returned back to meet his brother Esau, it was 20 years, because he did 14 years working for Rahel. And then after the 14 years, he served for another 6 years, put together 20 years. And out of these 20 years, he made so much wealth, property, and then decided to return to his father's, where his father was living, to where they were living previously, to Isaac's place. And on the way, it was another issue. He has to wrestle with a mysterious stranger who we believe to be a divine being. And then he changed Jacob's name to Israel. He met and reconciled with his brother Esau in Canaan, and later settled in Canaan. It is important for us to know that Jacob had 13 children that we know of, 10 of whom were founders of the tribe of Israel. Out of the 13, 10 were founders of the tribe of Israel. Now let's look at it. Leah bore him his only daughter, Dinah. That is the only daughter we know. And then 6 child sons. So we have Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Levi did not found any of the tribes of Israel. We have to note it. But it was because he was ancestors of the Levites. The Levites were not really a tribe. They were only to serve God, bring the people before God. So they were like what we say, the Asophos at the time. So they were not founders, they were servants of God. So Levi wasn't part of the founders. So that's why I say we have 10 of his children were founders of Israel. So Levi is out. Dinah is out because she's a daughter. So we are left with 11. Judah. And Judah was also a child from between Jacob and Leah. And we get to know that it was Judah, the tribe that we have, the Davidic monarchy, and the descendants coming down to Jesus Christ. So the tribe of Judah. We have Issachar and Zebulun, who were all children from Leah. So these were the 6 children from Leah, 6 sons from Leah, plus Dinah, making 7. Leah's maid servant, Zilpah, also bore Gad and Asher. And Rahel's maid servant, Bilhah, also bore Dan and Naphtali. So the maid servants all gave birth to 2 each, and that is it. We get to know that after, from the genealogy above, you see that when Leah gave birth to 4 children here, Rahel was deep in sorrow. So she decided that if she is not giving birth, the Lord had closed her tummy, her womb, then she will give her servant, Bilhah, to the husband so that the servant will born children for her, which was their culture at the time. So when the servant was given to Jacob, Jacob had sexual intercourse with her, and these 2 children were born, Dan and Naphtali. At that time, Leah was not giving birth again. Her womb was also closed. So she also decided that it looked like the Lord had closed my womb. So if I don't take time, Rahel will now be having more children. So she also gave her servant, Zilpah, to Jacob, and Jacob gave birth to Gad and Asher from there. Then after her womb was open, then she gave birth to Issachar, Zebulun, and then Dinah. So if you look at it, Reuben first, Simeon second, Levi third, Judah fourth. Dan is the 5th born, Naphtali is the 6th, Gad the 7th, Asher the 8th, Issachar the 9th, Zebulun the 10th. Now, Dinah came, and then that was before Rahel's womb was open. And then Joseph and Benjamin came to making up the 13 children in all that were born to Jacob. So Rahel's children, Benjamin and Joseph. Now, Joseph also did not found any of the tribe of Israel. So the 10 children founded it. Levi is not a founder of the tribe of Israel, neither is Joseph. However, Joseph became the main pillar of the tribe of Israel because he had his 2 children being founders of the tribe of Israel. So one way or the other, it looked like Joseph even became almost like the eldest because he has his 2 children, eldest 2 children were founders of the tribe. So everyone got one, but he had 2. Even though it was not him, his 2 children had it. And these people, the children were Manasseh and Ephraim. So this added up to make up the 12th tribe of Israel. We get to know that Jacob's story now later gets into the life of Joseph. And then that is where we get to the Exodus era. Later in his life, there was a great famine in the area, and therefore he has to migrate to Egypt and then to unite with his son Joseph, who had disappeared for some years. Jacob died in Egypt at the age of 147 years and was buried in Canaan. He was brought back to be buried there. So this Joseph that we are talking about, who is he? Joseph was the son of Jacob and Rahel, as we have seen from the genealogy. He lived in Canaan with 1 full brother who was Benjamin and 10 half brothers. We have mentioned their name, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and the rest. And later, and we can also talk about a half sister who was Dinah. Joseph was Rahel's firstborn and Jacob's 11th son. He was favored by his father for his good character. So Jacob gave him a coat of many colors. And this is a coat of many colors. We can read from Genesis chapter 37, verse 3. So Genesis chapter 37, verse 3. So Jacob had that love for his son. And then because of that, decided to buy him the coat of many colors. Genesis chapter 33, verse 6. We get the full story there. 37, verse 3. We get the full story there. Joseph's brothers saw that their father loved him more, so they hated him. According to Genesis chapter 37, verse 4. They realized that no, the father loved him so much. So they hated him. And sometimes, through no fault of his, he has to bear these things because he was the favorite child. So let's get to Genesis chapter 37 and read something from there. Verse 3 says that Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other children because Joseph had been born to him in his old age. So one day, Jacob had a special gift made for Joseph, a beautiful robe. But his brothers hated Joseph because their father loved him more than the rest of them. They couldn't say a kind word to him. So, because their father loved him, jealousy set in. And because of that, they hated him. Then, out of anger, they decided to do something because when he was just about 70 years old, Jacob had two dreams. One dream was that he saw 11 bums standing in a bunch of wheat standing. And then his was in the middle. Each of them was standing by theirs. And then they all bowed down. Their bunch bowed down to him. 2, he saw the stars, the moon and the star all bowing down to him. So they felt like, these two dreams means that you are going to rule over us. That's the indication. So they had their own plan against him. Genesis chapter 37, verse 5 to 11. Let's read. One night, Joseph had a dream. And when he has told his brothers about it, they hated him more than ever. And look to the word, they hated him more than ever. Listen to this dream, he said. We were out in the field trying our bands of grain. Suddenly my bundle stood up, and your bundles all gathered around and bowed low before mine. And the brothers were like, hey, this guy, what's wrong with him? His brothers responded, so you think you will be our king? Do you actually think you will reign over us? And they hated him all the more because of his dream and the way he talked about them. Soon Joseph had another dream. He will keep quiet. And again, he told his brothers about it. Listen, I have another dream. He said, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowed low before me. This time he told the dream to his father as well as to his brothers. But his father, wasn't happy. So he scolded him. What kind of dream is that? He asked. Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow to the ground before you? But while his brothers were jealous of Joseph, his father wondered what the dreams meant. That is the point. So there was a hatred because of Joseph's dreams. But if you look at the whole story, we get to know that the ending part of Joseph's life proved to be that the dream was a clear prophetic message to him that was coming to him. So what did the brothers do? One day, as they were in the field, Joseph was sent to them. As they were taking pasture for the sheep, Joseph was sent to them. And then what did they do? They decided, when they saw him coming, they conspired to kill him. But Reuben, being the firstborn, felt special responsibility for his younger brother and determined, if possible, to rescue him. So he suggested that they throw Joseph into a pit. The plan of Reuben was that he would come back and save his brother Joseph. And this is a pit. So he decided, let's throw him in, and then you come back to save him. They took the coat of many colors as he's being held here, and then threw him into the pit. Whilst Reuben was away, Judah suggested to them. So look at it. Judah suggested to them that they sell Joseph into slavery. The Ishmaelites were passing. So they agreed to sell him. And so they sold their own brother 20 shekels of silver. They sold their own brother. Genesis chapter 37, verse 28. This merchant, the Ishmaelites, took the young man to the land of Egypt. Then the brothers took Joseph's colorful coat, the coat of many colors, smelled it with a goat's blood, and gave it to Jacob as their father. They claimed that a wild beast had killed Joseph. So what would the father do? He mourned over his loss. But that was what they did. And this Joseph being sold by his own brothers into slavery. The merchants also, the Ishmaelites also sold Joseph to Potiphar, who was a captain of Pharaoh's guard in Egypt when they got there. Now, it's important for us to know that Joseph found himself in a strange country, deprived of the position of being a beloved son, and then now being a slave. But God was still at his side to bless and prosper his life. Therefore, whatever Joseph did, his services was excellent. He excelled in it. And therefore, Potiphar appointed him overseer over his household. The Lord was with Joseph, and he blessed Potiphar for the sake of Joseph. Genesis chapter 39, verse 5. Genesis chapter 39, verse 5. So let's see what happened. As a result of Joseph, what happened to the household of Potiphar. From the day Joseph was put in charge of his master's household and property, the Lord began to bless Potiphar's household for Joseph's sake. So for Joseph's sake, the blessings was for Joseph's sake. All his household affairs ran smoothly, and his crops and livestock flourished. So because of Joseph, the Lord decided to bless Potiphar. But something happened, a sad one. Potiphar's wife tried to seduce Joseph, and Joseph rejected her advances, saying that this would be a wicked thing and it will be against God. Genesis chapter 39, verse 9. Genesis chapter 39, verse 9. No one here has more authority than I do. He has held back nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How could I do such a wicked thing? It would be a great sin against God. That was Joseph's issue. So he decided not to sin against God. But that one also caused him a lot of problems, because Joseph's garment that he was with was put by Potiphar's wife. Says, "I come and lie with me." He says no, so he ran away. And then she fabricated a story accusing Joseph of rape. Therefore, Joseph was sentenced to prison. Because of God's grace, Joseph again won the favor of the superiors in the prison. One day, two high-ranking servants in Pharaoh's house, who had been thrown into prison, asked Joseph to interpret a dream they had the night before. Joseph gave them the interpretation, which came to pass. One was set free and returned to his previous position as the king's cupbearer, and the other one was killed. When we read Genesis chapter 40, verse 1 to 23, the full story is there on how the interpretation came, the dream came. Joseph asked the cupbearer to remember him before Pharaoh. But unfortunately, when he was freed and restored to his position, he forgot all about Joseph. It took 2 years, 2 solid years, before Pharaoh had a frightening dream. It was then that this cupbearer recalled Joseph's gift of dream interpretation and told Pharaoh about it. And therefore, Joseph was called in by Pharaoh. And the wonderful thing God used him to do was to give an interpretation to the dream, where there will be 7 years of plenty, food in abundance, followed by 7 years of famine in Egypt. Then Joseph advised Pharaoh and his council members to prepare for this famine by storing grain during the fruitful years, the 7 years, against the 7 years of famine. And Genesis chapter 41, verse 1 to 37 gives us this whole story. Joseph's interpretation of the dream and his advice were so pleasing to Pharaoh and his counselors that the king proposed the appointment of Joseph as the minister of food and granted him emergency powers. And the king elevated Joseph to the highest office under the crown. So Joseph was from prison to a higher rank office. Genesis chapter 41, verse 43. Genesis 41, verse 43 give us this. So let's just go over Genesis 41, verse 43. And it reads, Genesis 41, verse 43. Then he had Joseph ride in the chariots reserved for his second in command. So this is it. He was being placed at the position of even second in command. Right in the chariot he had reserved for his second in command. And wherever Joseph went, the command was shouted, kneel down. So Pharaoh put Joseph in charge of all Egypt. So he was placed, given authority. After this new appointment, Joseph got married to Asenath. That's the wife of Joseph, Asenath. And she was a princess of Egypt. Had 2 sons named Manasseh and Ephraim, as we have already known, with her. And he carried out his role as a governor of Egypt, storing up food during the years of plenty to sell to the Egyptians and the neighboring nations during the year of famine. An excellent job he did. At the height of the famine period, Jacob sent 10 of his sons to Egypt to buy grain. When things were very difficult, they needed food to eat. So Jacob decided to send 10 of his children. Now, note that the children were 12. Joseph is out, so they were left with 11. Benjamin was kept there. So these 10 came. And these 10 were those who saw Joseph, who hated Joseph. When the brothers met Joseph in Egypt, he knew them, but they didn't recognize him. So to test their character, he charged them of being spies and kept them for 3 days. Afterwards, he released all but one and sent them with the grain for their families. And he requested that they bring Benjamin back as proof of the original story of being 12 sons of Jacob. So they told him, oh, we are not spies. We are children of Jacob. We are 12. One is missing. So if he's so 10 is here, bring the other one. I'm keeping one more. At this point, the brothers felt that this mistreatment was a payback for what he had did to their brother. So now they realized that, hey, the way this man is treating us, is it a payback for what we did to our own brother? So Genesis chapter 42, verse 21 gives us that they started talking about it. Speaking among themselves, they said, clearly we are being punished because of what we did to Joseph long ago. We saw his anguish when he pleaded for his life. So Joseph pleaded for his life when he was being sold into slavery. But we're going to listen. That is why we are in this trouble. Didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy? So Reuben is now asking, but you wouldn't listen. And now we have to answer for his blood. So far as they are concerned, Joseph was dead, but they didn't know that it was the same Joseph mistreating them at this point. So Joseph heard what they were discussing, and he left them to weep. According to Genesis chapter 42, verse 23 to 24, he left them and went to weep when he heard them. He kept Simeon. As I said, he kept one of them. Simeon was kept and sent the others back, and also returning their money in their grain sack. He put their money in their grain sack. Genesis chapter 42, verse 25. The brothers were terrified when they found the money in their sack. And when they returned home, they told Jacob what they had gone through. And then they need to go back, bring Simeon, and then send, as they are going, they have to send Benjamin. But their father refused. That no, Rahel had 2 children. One is gone, one is left. I'm not ready to raise this one. So Jacob refused. Eventually, the famine was so severe that it forced Jacob to accept to send his children to Egypt. And Judah convinced his father to send Benjamin with them, giving his own life as a surety for his brother's life. According to Genesis chapter 43, verse 1 to 10. So this time, Jacob sent gifts and doubled the money for the grain with them. So Jacob decided to send gifts to whoever is in charge there. Didn't know it was his own son. And then he doubled the money that they brought back. When the brothers reached Egypt, Joseph commanded his servants to prepare a special meal for his brothers so he may eat with them. The brothers explained to Joseph's steward about the money that was placed in their sacks. And Joseph's servant brought Simeon out. When Joseph came to meet them, the brothers bowed to him, thus fulfilling Joseph's dream that he had seen before they sold him. So the dream came true when they bowed before him. Genesis chapter 43, verse 26. So Genesis chapter 43, verse 26, we get to know that at this point the dream came to pass. 43, verse 26, read. When Joseph came home, they gave him the gift they had brought him, then bowed low to the ground before him. And this was a dream that Joseph had years ago. Joseph asked about his family and was moved with emotion when he saw Benjamin, his brother. So he left the room to weep. At the table, his brothers were seated according to their birth order. Benjamin was given 5 times more food than his brothers. Again, Joseph tested his brothers by returning their money in their grain sack. But this time, he placed his silver cup in Benjamin's sack. When his brothers left, he sent his servant after them, accusing them of theft and threatening to take whoever has stolen the cup. They came back to Joseph, and Judah begged for Benjamin's life, saying, if something happened to Benjamin, their father would die. At this point, Judah offered his own life to save Benjamin. Now, it was this same Judah who, when we get to when Joseph was sold, it was this same Judah who suggested that they sell Joseph. Now, this Judah have repented and have seen, but it's now a new person. So this time he offered his life in an exchange for his brother Benjamin. And this one gave an evidence to Joseph that his brothers had changed. So he dismissed his servants and wept loudly that Pharaoh's house even heard him. Then he revealed his identity to his brothers, who were shocked and thought that he was going to scared of that he might retaliate. But Joseph just forgave his brothers and told them that even though they betrayed him, God overruled their evil act for good. And this is a remarkable statement. Even though they thought evil for him, God overruled it, their evil for good. He was filled with forgiveness. Then Joseph sent his brothers to bring Jacob and the whole family back to Egypt, that they may live in the land of Goshen. This area was the richest part of Egypt, so he gave the richer part of Egypt to his family. With great anticipation, Jacob could not even stay. He longed to see his beloved son. And the sight of seeing his son will even relieve him from these many years of sorrow, suffering, and pain. However, he was afraid of going to Egypt. He was afraid of going to Egypt because he remembered that there was an act of evil done to Abraham as a result of his